And if it were not for Barnabas, it's doubtful that he would have ever been accepted by the Christian church. But Barnabas was known as the son of encouragement. So he encouraged Paul by trusting in him and believing in him and having faith in him. And he instilled confidence in the disciples by telling them that the Apostle Paul was the real thing. On the screen, you have the oldest known image of Paul. It dates back to the 4th century. This was discovered last month, by the way, in Rome, in the catacombs. And they believe that the scholars believe the Apostle Paul looked something like this, because this goes back almost to the time of Paul. Not quite, but almost. And right close to this were bones that were buried. And tradition has it that these are the bones of the Apostle Paul. And they did some carbon dating on the bones, and the bones are dated from the 1st century. These very well may be the actual bones of the Apostle Paul. Notice from the way that he's described that he has a large forehead, he's bald, and he has a pointed beard. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. When we read about Paul and Barnabas, we notice, first of all, in the first part of the book of Acts, Acts 11:30, it mentions Barnabas and Saul. And then in 12:25 again, it says Barnabas and Saul. In 13:2, it talks about Barnabas and Saul. And in 13:7, it talks about Barnabas and Saul. Barnabas is always first. Barnabas and Saul. But then something happens. There's a switch. And in Acts 13:4, it now becomes Paul and Barnabas. And in 13:43, it's Paul and Barnabas. And verse 46, it's Paul and Barnabas. In 13:50, it's Paul and Barnabas. In 15:2, it's Paul and Barnabas. 15:22, it's Paul and Barnabas. 15:35, it's Paul and Barnabas. It looks like what's happening is that Barnabas is wanting Paul to have prominence. And so they put Paul first. Paul and Barnabas. Again, in 15:36, you see Paul and Barnabas. It's no longer Barnabas and Saul. Saul has had this Damascus Road experience. He's now Paul, and so now it's Paul and Barnabas. Well, the Bible tells us in Acts 14 that Paul and Barnabas saw this guy who was a cripple, and Paul actually healed him. And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they yelled out in the language of Lycaonia, "The gods have turned into humans and have come down to us," because they knew this guy was crippled from birth. And now they see this guy up walking around, and you know, humans can't do that. Humans simply cannot heal people, and so these guys must be gods, is the way they were thinking. And they decided that the Apostle Paul was Hermes, and they decided that Barnabas was Zeus. And you can read about this in the middle chapters in the book of Acts. Now, this tells us something about the way they looked. So I already told you the Apostle Paul had a large forehead, pointed beard. He was bald. And tradition tells us that he was about 5 feet tall. So he was a little bit on the short side. On the other hand, you have Barnabas, who must have been a very large man. He was like Zeus, they said. And so the scholars believe that, you have this very large guy and this very small guy. And it reminds me a lot of times of the basketball pictures. You know, you get some guy who's 5'5" playing professional basketball next to a guy who's 7'5". It looks just a little strange. But anyway, they performed this miracle. And they were mistaken for gods, and the people wanted to offer sacrifices to them. And they said no. And then the end result was, because they refused, that they took Paul out and they stoned him and left him for dead. I don't know about you, but you know, I sort of like it when people think I'm special. You know, here's Paul and Barnabas, and they're saying, look, we're not special, we're just like you. We're just ordinary people. I kind of like it when people think I'm special, especially my wife. Yeah, I kind of enjoy that. But here, it's a different story. These guys are saying, we're not gods. We're nothing special. We're sinners just like you. So they preached the good news. And when they returned, now they're going back to Antioch. It says they were strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. So they were strengthening the disciples and encouraging them. So this is what Barnabas was all about. Wouldn't that be neat if that's how you were known? You were known for strengthening people and encouraging people. Barnabas was like that. How many people encourage you? You have your clickers. When you get discouraged, A, no one encourages you. B, there's one person who always encourages me. 2 is C. 3 is D. And 4 or more is E. So you have your clickers, and I invite you to register your opinion now. How many people encourage you when you are discouraged? You have 15 seconds, and you can begin now. How many people encourage you? A, B, C, D, or E? You have just 3 seconds left. And here's what you said. You said, 9 of you said 0. And was that 25 or 15? 15? 15 of you said 1. And 18 of you said 2. And 17 said 3. And then 51 said 4 or more. Isn't that neat? It's a large group of people who have a great support group that people encourage you. It's important to have someone encourage you. And it's important to have just more than 1 or 2 people, because what if you need encouraging and you try to call someone and they're not home or they don't answer? I remember more than 20 years ago when my wife was diagnosed with cancer that I wanted to call someone and I wanted encouragement. So I knew who to call. So I called this person, and I had several people in this kind of category that I could call. And fortunately for me, the first person I called was available, and I talked to this person. But if that first person hadn't been available, I had others I could call. And that was a strength to me, knowing that I would be able to talk to someone. And of course, you know the rest of the story. Barbara's doing very well, and there's been no reoccurrence of the cancer. But it's important to have a large support group. Now, how often have you been discouraged at Orange Coast Church Helped? In other words, maybe you were feeling kind of blue, you came to church, and then, you felt better because you came to church and you got support at church. How often have you been discouraged and yet helped at Orange Coast Church? Never, seldom, often, or regularly?